you're gonna look great. But if you wanna stay in shape, well, you better hit the GymWits.
Welcome to the GymWits podcast. I'm Justin Gill,
Yes.
aka Chef Sonic.
We are the GymWits. So, Justin, how was your Halloween?
It was okay. I was right by the parade.
Okay, did you
and
see
we got
it?
stuck in a little bit of it. Yeah, it's
We
pretty
used
crazy.
to spend every Halloween like we do something. And in the last few years, we haven't.
Yeah,
So we
well,
need to...
maybe we burned out on it a little bit just because
guess
we went so hardcore with it.
Yeah, I guess. But we need to correct that. It's been a few years.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
gotta-
I think
gotta
we'll hit it hard
prepare for next year.
I needed a few years to not really do that, but yeah.
Yeah, but we got to figure something. I think also, there's nothing like having like an idea that really makes you engaged and excited to do it. And my part, as we've talked about in previous podcasts, is I've been so focused on my dogs that I haven't really thought about myself.
Yeah.
So we went out. My wife and I went out, which it was nice. We had a cool costume. I was Edgar Allan Poe, and I had this creepy like mask and costume,
That's
and
cool.
she was a raven.
That's great.
So
All right.
it worked out well. So
Very good.
It was fun.
Funny because you were Raven.
Huh?
You used to be Raven.
I did.
Yeah, that was your wrestler.
Oh
name.
yeah, when we were in junior high school.
Yeah,
we were,
Raven. That was your
until there was an actual raven. And
yeah,
then
that
I
was your
like, well, I can't
your,
be.
your imitation crow.
Yeah, exactly. From junior high. Wow, that's going deep into the well. All right.
Do you remember my wrestler name?
What?
From junior high school?
No, I don't remember. What was
Had
your
a good
wrestler name?
name.
What?
Tiger Eye Sledge
Yes, I
Shaw.
remember that Tiger Eye Sledge Shaw. How'd you come up with that name?
I don't know. That was just a pretty good name.
Yeah, that was
Tiger Eye
ridiculous.
Sledge Shaw.
Yeah, wow. That's really pulling from.
pulling from the well.
Wow. I probably
that
have
goes back.
Yeah, that goes back. Yeah, we had our own, as many people probably did, we had our own junior high school wrestling federation.
Yeah.
And wow, Tiger Eye Sledge Shaw.
That was my name. So for all you guys thinking back that are maybe around our age, maybe a little older, maybe a little younger, thinking back to when you were very young, but this is more of a boys thing.
Yeah.
You know, like if you were ever into pro wrestling, I'm sure for our female listeners, you guys have your own equivalent.
Yeah.
But yeah, we used to like the pro wrestling when we were kids, so we of course had our own league, and it was so funny.
Yeah,
so
it
we
was.
had some fun with that.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, on to today's fitness topic.
Yeah.
What do we have on tap?
So
today?
we're talking about one of the more unspoken aspects of fitness, and we don't always do this because we like to talk a lot of theory and philosophy. This one's going to be a little bit more technical, and we're going to discuss tempo, and that could actually mean a few different things. So what is the basis of tempo when it comes to specific exercises?
Okay, so when you're doing let's say weight training, we'll talk a little bit about tempo with cardio, which is a little bit different, probably more in your realm.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about tempo, it's basically the speed at which you're performing each repetition. So if you have like a set is a total, a set would include 10 repetitions, and each individual repetition has a certain speed that you should be performing it at. And then within the repetition, it's comprised of different segments. So before we get into actually tempo, I think the first thing to talk about is tension, which is kind of the basis and why we focus on tempo, why tempo becomes important. So basically, what tension is exactly that. When your muscles are engaged, they're tense. So there's tension within the muscle muscles that are being engaged during a particular exercise.
And that's based on the resistance that's causing the muscles to be
engaged.
engaged.
Yes, part one variable would be the resistance.
So there's more variables.
Well, if you're doing, let's say, a biceps curl,
Okay.
There's going to be the amount of tension is based on the angle of the movement, where the resistance is coming from, the amount of resistance, and then the speed also is part, plays a role in. I guess, the next step is, so the tension, and then there's time under tension. So one of the more important variables, especially when it comes to strength and size or hypertrophy, is the time that you spend under tension. So the more time you spend under tension, the more work you're doing, the stronger and or the larger the muscles will grow. Generally, and we'll explain it a little bit in better detail as we go on. But if I'm doing a biceps curl while I'm curling and or letting the weight down, so on both parts of the curl or any exercise, there's tension. And so your tempo is going to determine the time under tension. So if you're going at a very fast tempo, if you're going really, really fast, you're going to spend less time under tension than if you're going really, really slowly. Because you're just physically, if you do 10 repetitions and you do them fast, it's less time than if you do them slow. So,
and so just first, before we even get into the subject, that doesn't mean better or worse, faster, because I know there may be reasons why you want to do something fast. It might have a different...
You got loud there for a second.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Have a different reason for doing it fast.
Yeah, there's a reason
so
why...
So it isn't better, they just will have different results,
No,
correct?
there's no better or worse. It really depends on the goal.
Okay.
There is a better way if you have a specific goal. There's a certain tempo you're going to want, but there's no like... I would say depending on what the goal is, there are going to be reasons to do it a certain way, or another way. Depending on the goal.
So you just don't want to think right off the bat, oh, I have to do it at this speed or I'm not doing it right. It's all based on what the goal is.
Yeah, and so the problem is that it is people don't consider it often. I see people kind of doing reps either super fast or super slow or without really any thought going into the tempo of the exercise. So basically, each movement is kind of comprised of, you'll see it mentioned as 3 or really 4 different parts, so 4 segments, right? So again, I like using the biceps curl because everyone knows it. It's simple movement, right? You stand, palms up, you flex the elbows and you extend the elbows. Very simple, straightforward exercise. So and then I guess I should say it's 4 parts, but depending on how complex the exercise is, we may add more parts. But just for a simple, basic, your normal basic, straightforward weightlifting exercise, we're going to say 4 parts. So let's say I start standing with my arms hanging down, right? So that's actually part 1 because you're kind of paused for a moment. Well, no, let me change that. Forget I said that. Okay. So starting with the biceps. So part 1, I flex my elbows, right? So that would be the concentric portion. So the concentric portion is going to be whenever you're fighting against the resistance, right? You're overcoming the resistance. So with a free weight or body weight, as we've talked about before, it's always going up. So the concentric part is always when you're going up because that's against gravity. That's where you have to overcome whatever the external resistance is, right? So that's the concentric part. So when you get to the top of the curl, there's got to be a pause, right? You have to transition back down. So at the very top of the curl, that's part 2, where you're actually paused. So you're pausing at the top of the movement. There's like an isometric contraction, right? For that pause while you're holding for however long that pause is, whether it's for seconds or if it's for minutes. That's the point where you're isometrically contracted. You stop. So that's part 2. Okay. So part 3 is the eccentric portion. You let the weight back down. So on the eccentric part, again, this part, the weight's overcoming you. So the amount of weight is overcoming the resistance you're applying. Now, because you have to let the weight down, you're allowing the weight to overcome you. So that's one way to think about it. So now again, with free weights or body weight, that's always going down because that's going down with direction gravity is taking you. But if you're using certain machines, cables, bands, it might be different depending on the resistance. But it's always going to be when the weight is overcoming you, or the kind of quote easy part of the movement, the part where you just get to let the weight overcome you.
And of course, we know that there's ways to do it where it's not the easy
part.
part.
Exactly, which we'll get into. So then the fourth part is, again, at the bottom, you pause again. So before I go back up for my second repetition, I have to pause at the bottom of the movement to transition. So again, that pause might be half a second, it might be 5 seconds, but there's another pause at the bottom of the movement in order to go back up. So you've got those 4 parts. The concentric part where you go against the resistance, you overcome resistance. Isometric where you pause and then get set to return. There's the eccentric part where the resistance overcomes you. You return the weight back down, and then another isometric pause at the bottom of the movement. So those are your 4 points of the movement. So each part will have its own speed, right? So each part you're gonna have a certain amount of seconds or pieces of a second that you actually want to hold, during each portion. So typically you'll see it written out as 1-1-3, which might mean, a 1 second concentric where you curl up, a 1 second pause, and then 3 seconds down. So you might see 3 numbers. If you see 3 numbers, they're just eliminating that bottom number when you get to the bottom. But if you see a 4th number, then that's the bottom part. So you would have 1-1-3-1, which would be, again, 1 second up, 1 second pause at the top, a 3 second control down, and then a 1 second pause at the bottom. So that would be it. So that's basically where you see it. I've seen it written differently. So sometimes you might have to seek out exactly which number applies to which part of the movement. But that's typically how it's going to be written out. the kind of concentric part's first, the pause is second, the eccentric part is third, and then if there's a fourth number, that's the other pause. But again, if you have a more complicated exercises with more components, there may be a little bit different tempo on that. So, any questions so far?
All right, no, making perfect sense.
Okay, I hope so. All right, so basically, where people go wrong on this is a couple parts. So one part is right away. What do you think? Where can you see people going wrong here or getting mixed up?
Okay, so right off the bat, I would say that being uneven.
Uneven, how so?
With the numbers.
Okay.
Rest, like pausing for too long, doing the lift, letting it down, like it all at varying tempos.
Yeah.
So maybe after, you're doing it really fast and you get a little tired, so you do it slower, then you rest, then when you're doing in your isometric, sort of the break, or when you get to the top, then you're like, you rest, and then you just let it down. So this very uneven across the board. So I could see that happening. I'm sure I've done that before. I could see people maybe taking, based on their goal, not taking too long to do something.
Yep.
A lot of it I can see, though. A big issue is in the how long the break is, or how long with your isometric. What do you call that again?
Isometric, like just pause.
The pause is, and then probably also a lot in the eccentric.
Yeah.
Whether they're doing it too slow or too fast, or not doing it. What I've always heard was that the eccentric should be in a controlled motion. I also had one trainer, a personal trainer, who I didn't like really, who his whole focus was on eccentric, right? He wanted these really slow eccentrics to really work the negatives, and I just, something about it didn't feel right.
Yeah.
So,
we'll get into that a little bit.
That's what I would think.
We'll talk
some
a little
of the
bit
issues,
about
mainly
that.
being inconsistent, uneven, and
Yeah. Okay. So as it relates to the time under tension, I think the biggest mistake people make is basically just swinging the weights, almost using momentum.
To
carry. So there are portions where momentum will help, but again, if the goal is the maximizing time under tension, then you want to maximize that. You want to take advantage of and use and be as consistent as possible with the weights. So if you're just like letting the weight swing down, for example, that's the biggest mistake I see people make, is they do a curl and then they just let the weight fly down, or they do a bench press and they just let the weight drop. If you do that, you're actually losing out on an advantage that you can get from the negative portion of the movement. So basically, we'll go into a couple of things about why is it important. So again, you're maximizing the time under tension, so which is necessary for strength and for size. It's also control. You need to control the weights. If you don't have control over the weights, it can really lead to potential injuries. It also gives you kind of more awareness of what you're doing, your kind of proprioception, as we've talked about before. And also it helps with the connective tissues, like the tendons, ligaments. It's going to help you with developing and strengthening those, which are much harder to strengthen than the other muscles. So it's really important to have an awareness of the tempo. And typically the main mistake people make is going too fast. So slowing down can definitely help. So I guess to get into like the normal range, the normal rule of thumb is 1 second concentric, a 1 second pause, or half a second, 1 second pause, and 2 to 3 second eccentric.
Okay.
So basically, again, on the curl, I curl up at a 1 count, I hold at a 1 count, and then I control it down at a 2 or a 3 count. So you're basically allowing the muscles to work, because even though the weight's overcoming you on the way down on the eccentric part, if you're doing it for 3 seconds, even though the weight's overcoming you, you still have to provide tension to decelerate the weight. So you're still working. So you're taking advantage of that movement. So the good thing about that also is, if you go too slow on the concentric, it's not natural. So if I'm doing it like naturally, movements, you go at the speed that the resistance will allow. So if I can go up at a 1 count and I force myself to go slowly, I lose a little bit of the power that I might gain and actual overall strength by going slower. But on the negative part, you can control, negative part is that's where you want to key in on controlling it down. So I think when for the average person, you kind of go up as far as your strength, as quickly as your strength will allow you, without being ballistic and without like throwing your back out. But you really want to control the weight down, because that's the part that you're going to really miss out on if you don't do it.
Okay, so that was sort of the big question I had.
Yeah.
When we talk about explosivity, power, strength, those those three things.
Yeah.
So now, is there a concern that if you do the exercise, maybe let's switch it to a bench press, too explosively, too fast going up, then while you're working that aspect, but you're not gaining. So explosivity, what is that power?
Yeah.
All right, so
and that's
power.
a little bit different. Yeah.
So now that you might be working power, but not strength. Or does it work that way on a lift? That if you're lifting it, you're getting strong and powerful.
I mean, they're different. They're different concepts. So we'll get a little bit more into the power and what the tempo should be for power. But strength,
so there's a different tempo.
There's a different.
This is big. So there's a different tempo for power than there is for strength.
Yes. Strength is how much you can lift. Right. That is just. I mean, just a general idea.
Okay.
If your strength is how much, what load can you bench press if you're bench pressing, right? That's the measure of strength. That's all that we're really looking at is what's the amount of weight we can give you and how much can you press it up.
But not how you can do it.
Not necessarily. Well, I mean, let's say with good form, right? How much weight can we put on a bench press when you lift? Power adds a second element of time.
Yes.
So it's a measure of the mass and then the acceleration, or how fast you're able to accelerate that weight. So if you can bench press, let's say 500 pounds, but it takes you 7 seconds to get the weight up, and I can't bench press that much weight, but I can bench press 100 pounds, but I can explode. I can get that up in a quarter of a second. While maybe it takes you a second, then in that way I have more power. I'm generating more power than you, even though I might not be as physically strong as you. So there's a different component. So we'll talk a little bit more about this, but like what's the speed? If you're trained, like if you're an athletes typically, it's about most athletes have the speed and power component added to what they're doing. Yeah. So they're gonna. Some of their training will be more geared towards power than it would be towards strength. But again, that depends on the athlete and the sport and the phase of their training. So anyway, as I said, the basic general rule is 1 second up or 1 second concentric, 1 second pause, 2 to 3 second eccentric, just to get the control on the way down. So now if you focus too much on the eccentric, let's say you go down at a 10 count, that's almost becomes inefficient because then you're fatiguing the muscle. You'll potentially fatigue the muscle before you can get as many repetitions as you can. So there's a little bit of playing with the amount of time that you're under tension in order to maximize, get the right amount of repetitions and get the right amount of weight and not fatigue your muscles too much, because the negative part will fatigue you quickly if you do it. You'll notice it if you've never focused on the negative portion. If you start to control the weight down, you're going to fatigue much quicker. So if you're used to lifting a certain amount of weight and then you start doing it but controlling that negative portion or the eccentric portion, you're going to find that you're not going to be able to do as many repetitions because it's just harder on the muscles. So now if your goal is building strength, that typically is going to be done with heavier weights. And so it'll be a little bit closer to like a 2 second concentric, because the weight's going to be enough that you can't just like bring it up quickly. And then it'll still be about a 2 second eccentric portion, because those on the way down, it's going to be heavy enough that you're not going to be able to decelerate it at a super slow pace, so that's going to be part of it. It's a little bit harder. So for strength training, it's typically like 2 second up, 2 to 3 second down is going to be typically what you're going to see because of the weights that are involved with strength. And we're talking about just focused on strength, building strength, not necessarily size. So when it comes to strength training, the actual goal is increasing the load or the amount of weight. That's your focus, right? Like we talked about before. So that's the main focus. So now, if your focus is not necessarily strength, but building size, like getting larger muscles, while it's related to strength, then the time under tension becomes more important. So the overall time under tension throughout your entire workout, that's going to kind of be the deciding factor, or the most important variable or factor in your workout.
Does that mean you would want to actually use less weight?
Yes. So when
wow, what an interesting concept.
Yeah. So if you're
less weight but slower makes your muscles bigger.
Exactly. Yeah. Basically, that's.
Do you know why is that?
The time under tension.
Do you know the biology behind it?
I wouldn't be able to tell you offhand like the exact biology behind it, but the main component is the time under tension. So if you're focused on building strength, it's kind of like interval training, the way I think of it is like interval training. If the focus is just building your kind of overall your conditioning, then you just train at as high of a level as you like. Let's say we're talking about high intensity interval training, right? Which is going to help with your conditioning, but may not help you run a marathon. If the focus is just on building your conditioning and increasing your VO2 max, you're going to train as hard as you can, but for much shorter periods of time. That's the same thing with strength. If my goal is building strength, I'm just going to lift as heavy as I can, but I'm not lifting the volume of work is not quite enough to build the muscles. So the most important thing when it comes to hypertrophy or building size is the volume of work or the time under tension. So that's the most important component for the muscles to adapt to grow. So when it comes to the hypertrophy training, your time will then be again about 2 seconds up, but you're really going to focus on like a 4 second down. So you're like 1 to 2 seconds on the concentric part, again a 1 second pause, but then it's 4 seconds down. So you're really trying to maximize the time under tension for hypertrophy training.
So it's so funny that when we were kids, and even now, everyone who's going to the gym is like, oh, I want to get big, and they're trying to do heavy weights. They were doing it the wrong way.
Well,
they should have been doing slightly less weight and slower.
Well, not necessarily. It depends. So now strength. When we talk like
now, strength also
we're
helps
talking
with size
real,
because if you're stronger, then if you get yourself stronger, then you're able to do that less weight.
And no, I
with
think
longer time.
in high school we just thought strength equaled size, so we didn't think any different. But most people will train in the 6 to 10 rep range, so they're generally in that hypertrophy range. When you're doing strength training, you're really in like a 2, 3, 4, 5 repetition range. You're really going as heavy as you can. You're really working that. So there is a bit of a difference. Like when you're doing the size training, you're going to be a little bit higher in that range. But I think, in general, the stronger you are, the bigger you are.
So now, why doesn't it work this way, where you can do a lot less? Or not a lot less weight, but significantly less weight, and just work it for, like, if you're doing a curl, like, just for a really long time? Why does that not? Like, if you were to do 30 seconds of curling where you're constantly under tension with a lighter weight, what does that not make you bigger?
Okay, so two parts. I looked that up. I was trying to look that up. I couldn't find anything, any studies that were done where that was the focus. Like they just did really light weights, but for extremely long periods of time.
It's not even really light.
A component of it is the weight. So that's the thing. You have to have a reasonable amount of weight. Okay. Now, if you do a really light weight, then that just means you're spending much more time. So it just becomes inefficient. Yes. Regardless, you can probably build doing that. But I think there is a component, like there's like a threshold of weight that is necessary.
Now, do we know that threshold? You could figure, and maybe sure it differs from person to person, but if you could figure out what sort of the threshold is of weight to size for clients that are really looking to say, I just want to build size.
Well, no, we know that. I mean, it's been the same for a long time. Again, that threshold is whatever you're like, we talk about your 1 rep max, your 8 rep max. So you're staying in the 8 to 10, 8 to 12 repetition range, and you're doing, a good deal of exercise. You're doing, let's say 4 to 5 sets per exercise, and then 5 to 6 exercises, or more. That tends to be the range.
15 reps, which is still somewhat significant weight, just a little bit less, but more time. So by this theory, you would think that doing more reps and more time would actually get you bigger, but it doesn't.
No. Yeah. No. As far as I know, it does not.
Weird. So there
does seem to be
little threshold point.
Yeah. Yeah, there does. But I couldn't find anything that was like, this was a study that showed that doing 15 rep range but longer time under tension yielded the same results. So I don't know for sure, but
of course we're starting to get into muscle endurance.
Yeah. So which is I guess we could talk about that. So if the goal is muscle endurance, then you're looking at a longer period. So then it's like, let's say a 1 to 2 second concentric, then like a 6 or 7 second eccentric. So the focus really is on developing the muscle endurance. So, that might be a goal if let's say you're playing a sport or you're doing something that requires endurance in a specific area, like, boxers, let's say, who need endurance within the shoulders to keep the hands up. Maybe doing that might help. It doesn't translate to speed, doesn't translate to power, but maybe if you find that your shoulders are getting tired, that might be a method of training to help build endurance. So if you want to build muscle endurance, then you're going to be at a much longer.
So it's also interesting that the stress there would be on the eccentric. Now, what about this concept where it's kids I remember would say, "Oh, I did 40 bench presses. I did 40," where they weren't really focusing on the negative. They would just go push up as much. They would just push it as many times, do it as fast as they can. Is there a strategy to just doing as much and as many reps with a lightweight as fast as you can? Does that have any benefit?
I mean, the benefit is speed potentially, potentially muscle endurance as well, but not in the same way. So let's say now we'll take the boxer example as well. So where in some ways you'll build muscle endurance doing it really slow. In another way, and which might translate better, is if you do something really fast for the shoulders, rapidly but constant and over, that'll also help you build muscle endurance as well. So it has the benefit of, again, increasing speed, increasing muscle endurance, and then if you have a significant amount of weight, it increases power. So then we get to power. So the tempo, if you're doing for speed or power, basically becomes as fast as you can within reason. So if we're talking about, if I want to be, and again, speed and power become two different things. So power typically has the component of a heavy load involved with it, or it kind of, where speed is just how quickly, how fast you can do something. They're interchanged, like they work together in some ways, but then sometimes they branch off. So
like a squat would be a classic exercise where you're trying to do it explosively fast.
What, with a squat?
Weight. Yeah, like with a heavy weight.
No, squat with a heavy weight, you're going to do more for strength. That's going to be more. I mean,
so you don't want to try to do that for power. It's not.
Power. We're talking about split seconds. Like saying like a squat jump would be power. Like a regular squat with weights, you're typically doing. You can't do it explosively because there's there's a deceleration that's necessary for squats. You can try to do it somewhat explosively, but it's really dangerous to like do an explosive squat because you have to decelerate at some point, and then you're dealing with the heavy weight that's coming back, kind of compressing back down at a fast pace. So
then what am I thinking of when
like a power clean or a snatch, something like that, which with weight can be done explosively, but you also end up in a position where you're not going to hurt yourself, at the top. So something like that would be an example of an exercise that's done with power. So those are typically done as quickly as possible. So you're exploding up into that movement. So same thing like a jump, a squat jump, you're exploding into that movement. Versus like if I'm doing high knees where I'm rapidly running the legs in place, that's more of a speed exercise. I'm trying to do something rapidly, constant movement quickly as fast as I can.
Because I used to say there was, I don't remember if fitness coaches who are trainers, they would, like even when I was doing a bench press, they would say when you're doing the bench press, push up as fast as you can.
You can, but there's a limit to that because at some point you go so fast that the bar flies out of your hands potentially. So if you have
maybe just mean it as opposed to pushing up slow, they just want you to go up.
So which is like I was saying, at the concentric part, you want to kind of go to one count. So you're going quickly up, but then you want to control it back down. So
you're going crazy fast with it. Really doesn't. That's not. It's no real point in doing that.
So basically, athletes typically, especially when they're doing more sports specific training, are going to be training more in the explosive or the speed range, where they're focused on how fast they can do the movement. But obviously, whatever the exercise, you have to have trained up to it and progressed towards doing that. So that's basically it with the tempo. So now there are a couple things to consider with strength training. There are a couple other methods. There's what's called eccentric training. So what we've talked about the eccentric part. So there has been shown benefits to training to focusing on the eccentric part. So one way to do it is again like a method that's called like super slow training. So you're basically going really slow. So this could be upwards 10, 15, sometimes even I've seen like 20 seconds of on the eccentric portion. So that's one method. So kind of similar to what you were talking about with the lighter weights and going super slow. That's shown to have get some results.
I heard
with
that
strength.
There's some bad things that can
happen.
Yeah,
I'll talk about that. Yeah, I can talk about that in a second. And then there's also another type of eccentric training where you basically put on. This was popular when we were young too. I haven't seen it as much anymore, but basically let's say you take a bench press. So let's say your max on a bench press is 200 pounds. You put on like 250, but then you'd have someone spot you and help you get on the concentric part, but then you'd control the weight down. Because we're stronger, we can decelerate the weight and slow it down even if we can't push the weight up. So the idea being that you can control the weight down on the eccentric part, and then on the concentric part someone will help you get it back up, and then you control the weight back down. And again, it's been shown to get results. So it's a method of training that bodybuilders use, and it's a method of training that can help you get bigger. It's incredibly hard typically people suffer from a good deal of soreness afterwards, and I don't recommend it. But it's if you're a weightlifter, or if you're bodybuilding, or if you're trying to get bigger and you find yourself you're having a hard time, that's a great way to vary. Try it out. It's just like I only recommend it if you have a spotter and you've built up to it, because it is incredibly hard. But it's not. But there are some people who talk about it as like this is the way to get big, and that's not true. There are a million different ways and methods to try.
And of course, we know that
work
just
for
diet
some people.
and eating. If you're looking to get big, if you're not ingesting enough calories, you're not going to get big.
Yeah, no, that's gonna be part of it too. So, the eccentric styles can help. Now, the reason why I'm not a huge fan is that they're just not functional.
Yes.
They're not realistic. So they're training. They're not training the body in its natural speed, its natural movement. So and in fact, it's going way far in the other direction. So even when you're doing like the normal weights, typically when we do something where we're decelerating, we don't do it at a 2 or 3 count, but it helps to teach you control. And actually, I found like the one thing I learned from Pilates doing it for a little bit was like that I never, like if I would sit down, I would just kind of plop myself down. But in Pilates, they kind of taught you to, when you sit down, you control yourself down. And I found that helped a lot just with everything, with like moving around with normal life, like just that I really control my body in all situations. So, doing a 2 or 3 count is controlling yourself. Doing a 7 or 8 count is a little excessive.
Sure.
So those are the only negatives. And like I said, the other, no pun intended, the only other issue with like negative training or with eccentric training is, it is a little bit higher risk for injury because you're using such a heavy weight and you're using weights that the tendons and the ligaments may or may not be able to handle. There is a little bit higher risk of injuring either the muscles or the tendons or the ligaments. So it's one of those things that you really have to build yourself up to, and you kind of have to have some experience in the gym weightlifting before you try it. Like if you're somebody who's just kind of thinking of starting an exercise program, or you haven't been in the gym for 10 years, like I wouldn't jump into a negative program. That's not a good idea. It's something you got to kind of build yourself up to.
Now, what about the classic hold it? I remember Jude, my old trainer, who was a nice guy, used to do this, and I never knew if it was efficient or not. So let's say we were doing a lat pull down. Mm-hmm. When we were done with it, and of course they always asked to do stuff real slow. Then it was interesting that was a theme at that old gym that Ryan and I used to work out when we were in our late teens. So let's say we were done with the lat pull down. He would always have me hold it there for an extra 5 seconds. Does that do anything?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I've never stress on weird parts that weren't helping my muscles. It was just maybe an extra little bit for endurance, but I felt like it was putting stress on ligaments and joints.
I don't know about that.
Is it really good?
I think it depends on the form and what you're doing and how much weight, but it's still adding to your time under tension, so it can't hurt. You're already at a state of high level fatigue, so if the muscles are kind of burning out a little bit more, I can't see how it hurts. So I don't know if scientifically there's a back basis for it, but it still adds up to your time under tension. I would say my only concern with any of this is if your muscles don't have if you don't have the muscle endurance to handle it, then what might happen is you do one set of that and you kind of push yourself past your limit, and then you can't complete the next 2 or 3 sets. So part of it is your actual muscle endurance is important. So if you can't handle one hard set, that might just push you past your limit. Like I've had that with training sessions or clients or myself, where you do that one thing and that just pushes you, and then the muscle's done and you can't do anymore. So you kind of also have to, know your body and play with, what's your limit and what can I recover from and what's going to push me past that where I can't recover for the rest of the workout. Cool. So I think that does it for our talk. Any other questions?
A couple things to throw in for people that might be newcomers, and we started talking about it. We talked a lot about just using gravity momentum with eccentric and letting it down, but a lot of people do it with the concentric as well, like using momentum to help. So, like I see it at the gym, even with. I've seen it all the time with let's say with a bench press, people using more of a swinging motion to help do
you mean like a bicep
not a bench press, a bicep curl, using a swinging motion to help get the curl or pulling their body back. I see it sometimes too with rows. Now I know there's a way to do it with the rows where you're like just the regular row, right?
Yeah.
That's where people bend will bend back. Now I know there's a way to do it where that's the proper form, but I also see people sort of swinging in order to get that form.
Okay.
Or I'd even sometimes see it with the bench press. Have you ever seen this where people will hold it and they'll sort of bench it back quickly and then bounce it off the chest? Yeah. And like it was just it's about being results oriented.
Yeah.
Now there's two types of results oriented. There's the results oriented as, oh, I'm getting stronger, I'm getting more fit, I'm getting my muscles. That's the good results oriented. The bad results oriented is counting reps or counting weights, saying, oh, I was able to get 10 reps done, and only being concerned with the fact that you got 10 reps done, not how you got the 10 reps done. So yeah, if you got 10 reps done where you're swinging a curl, that's nothing. It doesn't mean anything. Mm-hmm. So I find that people, especially newcomers, are results oriented in that they want to say they've done this amount of weight. They want to say they've done this many reps, but the focus is not on doing it properly.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say about all that stuff and like how to catch yourself from doing it? How
okay,
to not be concerned? Because everyone wants to feel like they're strong, like, and they don't want to just do 3 or 4 reps and say I'm done. They want to try to use momentum or whatever it is. And I know that it's okay to cheat a little bit once in a while to get that extra little bit up, but for newcomers, it's a big issue.
Yeah, there's like 10 different points to address. Okay, so
Almost
first,
like we could do a podcast on that, on cheating.
First,
we should.
There definitely tends to, you see, especially when people are younger, more of a focus on how much weight can I press, and it's a little bit more ego driven. So that's definitely not the way to work out. So there's a motivational part to it. So sometimes like doing that extra bit's going to motivate you.
Okay,
but
within reason, yeah.
Yeah. So there's that. There is a benefit to doing that, but you want to do everything with good form, and you don't want to injure yourself. So yeah, I agree with you on that. So there's one point I did miss, I didn't emphasize, is that so you have during an exercise, depending on the movement, there are going to be points of the exercise where there's almost zero tension. Like if I do a shoulder press, right? If I press a weight up to the ceiling, at the very top, there's very little tension in the muscles. Like and then there are going to be points where you're at like maximum tension. So when I do like a bicep curl, at the top of the movement or close to it, there's like I'm at a level of fairly high tension. And then you have points that are mechanically very hard. So a point in the movement that's much, like let's take a bicep curl, for example. Again, when the arms are fully extended, it's significantly harder from that point to getting to about 90 degrees or a little bit less than getting from 90 degrees to the top. So that's something to consider, basically, is that within one movement, depending on the joint angle and the direction of the resistance, that weight will be much harder, significantly harder, almost impossible at certain points in that range of motion, and much, much easier at other points in that range of motion. So with one thing to get back to kind of the time under tension is if you're at a sticking point, if you're at like the top of a movement or that isometric hold, if you're at a point where you're generating a lot of tension, where the muscles are working, it's good to hold that for a second or so, like really focus on that pause and work on that isometric contraction before you control it down. So that was one point I didn't bring up before too. Okay. So that it's good to do a hold. So you focus on the concentric part, you focus on that isometric hold, you focus on the eccentric part. Now, to get to the momentum, so there is a place for using momentum. So we talked about if you're doing things for speed or power, then momentum is important. Again, with good form. So using momentum is a big part of generating power, especially with very complicated movements. If I do a power clean, it's all about generating the right kind of momentum to get the weight moving up. If I have a weight that I'm not physically strong enough to just kind of pick up, I might be able to do that if I contract the muscles in the right sequence and generate the right amount of momentum on the weight to pull the weight up into that position. So that's one part. The other part where momentum might hurt, and this is, you've got to be somewhat advanced and the technique has to be really precise. Otherwise, there's a risk of injury, is if I'm doing a weight, let's say I'm doing a biceps curl. So again, like I said, during the biceps curl, at the very bottom of the movement, it's significantly harder than if I can get my arms up 30 degrees or 40 degrees. Once I get my arms up a little bit, it's much, much easier. But getting from the bottom of the movement, where my elbows are fully extended, to the part where the elbows are bent, 45 degrees or up to 90 degrees, it's much, much harder. So there is a place to swing a little bit just to get the weight up to the point where then you use your strength to carry it up. But it's a very precise technique. You're not throwing your back into it. You're not you're not swinging for the entire movement. You're basically using a little bit of a swing, a very technical swing where the abs are engaged and you're just using as minimal swing as you can just to get the weight up to that point where you can carry it the rest of the way. So you're in your example of the seated row. It's the same thing. Let's say at the very end of the seated row, with arms are fully extended, it's much harder to pull the weight in than it is if I can pull the weight a couple inches towards my chest. So I might use the back, again, with good form, to swing slightly to generate a little momentum just to get it to that point where the muscles can take over. So there is a place to use momentum if you have that sticking point that you can't get past on kind of muscular strength alone. But if you can use a little bit of momentum to kind of just get you from point A to point B, you can take it from point B to the rest of the movement. So there is a place for it, but usually involves some form of swinging and driving the hips, which involves the lower back, which you have to be really careful, especially if it's with a heavy weight and if you're not used to doing it. So it's one of those things that unless you're experienced in doing it, you want to get somebody's experienced or somebody who's done this before to teach you how to do it properly, because it's not the safest thing in the world, even though you see people doing it all the time. And there are ways to do it where you're wasting the movement. So there are ways to kind of use momentum where you're basically using momentum for the whole movement and not for the part where it's absolutely necessary. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right.
Very good. Like, and I'm going back to thinking through some exercises that I might do if I'm doing a military press standing with a barbell. Right. So I sometimes find myself doing this when I'm fatigued at the end. Let's say I have one more rep to get up. I'll use a little momentum to get that last rep up. Now, is that just completely changing the exercise, or does it like when you're at the end anyway, it just helps to get that last bit
Depends
up?
on how you do it. No, I think it helps to get that last bit, but it really depends on how you're doing it. A good example, actually, speaking of that, is like the push press. So push press is kind of a standing. You can do it with the barbell, or I prefer with dumbbells, but it's basically a shoulder press, but you're using a mini squat, like a mini squat, an extension to get momentum, to get the weight up from like the shoulder level up to a little bit higher. And then you use, it depends on how much weight, but sometimes it's done with all momentum. Other times it's done where you use a little bit of momentum and the shoulders do the rest of the way. So again, momentum has its place, but it really depends on all of it has to be kind of deliberate. You have to know why you're doing it rather than just kind of doing it for the sake of it. So the other way, this is more up your alley, but it's actually, there's tempo when it comes to cardio, or when it comes to just kind of like the beats per minute. So we're not going to do nearly as much on this as we will with the weights, but there's some things to think about when you're doing cardio as far as what beats per minute, especially if you're if you're someone where the music is just kind of in the background. It doesn't matter quite as much as we talked about before. Like, some people listen to classical music, some people listen to thrash metal, some people listen to pop music. Everyone's got their own taste in music. But there are times where music can actually help you with your workout, because it can kind of help you set your pace. And so we see that with cardio, and especially with group exercise. Now, I teach group exercise, but I tend to teach music with music in the background and not as part of the class. But a lot of times people teach with music as part of the class, and so then they have to be kind of more focused on what the tempo of the music is at.
Well, generally the consensus is that when something is above 130 BPM, it has this natural effect on people to get them amped up and energized. And it's also something with decibel level. So if you make something really loud, it almost doesn't matter what it is. That will also get people get the endorphins.
I can see that.
So play something fast and loud, and you will get people moving.
Well, to get a little more specific, so basically for cardio, if you're warming up, it's good to warm up in like the 110 to 120 beats per minute range. So a good thing with that is if you overdo it, like let's say you're at 160 beats per minute, you might burn yourself out a little bit during your warm-up. So during the warm-up, like 110 to 120 tends to be the right amount. For like low-level cardio, like 120 to 130 tends to be a good range. For a little higher intensity, 130 to 160.
What do you mean?
Beats per minute.
What beats per minute?
Beats per minute.
What I know, but what is what
the music, the tempo? Tempo. The music tempo. Yeah,
it's interesting. So the music that you're listening to, this is what you recommend.
Yeah, what I recommend, and what's just not my what's recommended throughout the industry and based on studies. So you'll see most group exercise classes follow this. So 110 to 120 is for the warm up. And it makes sense. Like if you're listening to fast music and you're running, you're jogging for your warm up, you're going to move faster. So kind of keeping something at a little bit lower will help you warm up.
It's interesting.
120 to 130 is for kind of lower intensity if you're doing like a long run. If you're doing a higher intensity class, typically like 130 to 160 is the range. So kind of 130 on the low end beats per minute, 160. So you get a little bit good deal faster if you're as it gets more intense. And then as for something like high intensity interval training where you're trying to go as fast as you can, it can get as high as like 175 beats per minute. Can work. But again, you're right. Loudness can make a difference. And also I think the type of music, if it motivates you, that'll also make a difference. So like there's some songs that are much slower, but they have some component that really gets you motivated.
That goes into, that's more of a psychological, that goes more cultural and more sociological.
That's true. So those are some tips for cardio at beats per minute. Oh, no, one other tip actually, which I kind of found works too, is 96 beats per minute translates close enough to if you're going on the downbeat. If every time let's say you're doing a strength exercise, if you kind of go on the downbeat, then every time you do the one, you kind of go 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3. Yep. So you can do 96 beats per minute. Tends to work in that range.
That's interesting.
Tends to work with strength training. Obviously I'm kind of eliminating a little bit of the pauses, but that can work a little bit if you need like a tempo to keep you. Maybe 96 or a little bit slower will help you when you're doing your weight training. I just kind of found randomly that seems to be the right tempo for weight training if you're going to use music for a strength training workout, just for your average person. Again, if it's like if you want to do like hypertrophy training or you're doing real strength training, it might be different. But if you're just doing your average person, 96 beats per minute is a good range to work out in and keep up with the right tempo for your exercise. So I think that's it for tempo. Do you have any questions?
No, that's awesome. Interesting episode. That's pretty technical.
All right, so we got another Ask the Trainer this week. So this one is from James. So I'll let you answer it first, and then we'll see. We'll see. I'll give my answer after. But basically, so James says, I'm going to start off by saying you two are great. Thanks.
Thank you, James.
That's good feedback. I follow the GymWits on Spotify, and I'm always checking for the next podcast to listen to. To my question, I'm a regular in the gym. I go 3 to 4 days a week. No issues, and I'm always seeing results. But instead of staying longer, which will make it almost a 3-hour stay, how do twice a day visits sound? I was thinking about doing it for 3 weeks, maybe. Is this more beneficial? So what do you think? I guess the question is, he's spending a lot of time in the gym. How do 2 a days sound versus spending, one set period of time in the gym? What do you think?
Well, that's interesting. First off, I think a lot of it has to do with your fitness level. How fit are you? How in shape? So I've known people that get really enthusiastic about working out, and they're like, I don't know, Ryan, have you experienced this too with people that may not be super experienced? They're like, I'm going to start going 2 times a day.
All the time.
Right.
Well, I'll tell you the context, but yeah.
And they just get really into it. They want to... they want to start working out 2 times a day, and you're just asking for burnout. Yeah. But if you're experienced, you're in very good shape, and almost most importantly, you know how to control your workouts. You don't go too hard. And this comes only from experience and listening to your body. And I guess having proper nutrition and sleep helps too. We've talked a lot about that in recent episodes. If you know your body, if you're experienced, you can work out 2 times a day. And it could be very, very efficient. It could be pretty solid. I've never been a fan of working out 2 times a day. That's just me personally. I've done it before. The only times I would really be into working out 2 times a day is if they're very different type of workouts. So, for instance, if you're doing kickboxing or judo, then either right afterwards you go to lift weights, or you wait a few hours and then go to lift weights. What it sounds like James is doing is he's doing more weight training, more gym exercises, so he's trying to break them down 2 in a day. I think that, James, if you're looking to do it really almost professionally at a really high level, then I think 2 times a day could work. But if you're just in the gym for a 2-hour workout and you're pushing yourself hard enough 2 hours for a non-professional is a lot of time if you're using your gym time efficiently, which means you're not standing around talking and socializing too much. You're doing a proper rest between exercises, and you're also choosing the right workout for it. So I think that, do you think 3 hours, I guess you could do 3 hours. Let's say you like to socialize, but that is quite a bit of time in the gym. And of course, I don't know that your personal life with work and other social engagements that you might have. If 2 hours works for you and you're really serious, you want to do it professionally almost level, then I'd say go for it. But I really think that spending a solid 2 hours in the gym for a non-professional, if you do it efficiently, is quite a bit.
All right.
What do you think, Ryan?
So you actually touched on a lot of the points I was going to make. I guess everyone's different, so I'm just assuming that he's fine with 2 hours at a time, or 3 hours, as you mentioned, or he's fine with 2 a days. I'm going to eliminate the idea that first thing is efficiency is always going to be key. So if the concern is like I'm spending too much time in the gym, maybe I should split this up. I would first consider maybe the workout's not being efficient enough. Like there's no real reason to spend 2 or 3 hours. There's no reason to spend 3 hours in the gym unless you're training for something very specific. If you're a bodybuilder, I know a lot of guys who are bodybuilders who do spend 3 hours in the gym lifting weights, and that's just what they do.
Let's assume that James is not a professional.
Without making assumptions, so we'll say, your point on burnout is true. I see that more with kickboxing, as we have a lot of people that join the gym, and it's the first time and they love it. Like when you join, you're excited, you're seeing results, it's fun, and so you spend a lot of extra time in the gym, and then there is a higher risk of burning out, whether it's doing twice a day or spending a few hours. So first thing I would say is it sounds like he's experienced and he's been in the gym for a while, said he's been seeing results. So I'm going to assume that he's not brand new to the gym. Okay. So the question on 2 a days, generally, as you said, if you're doing different things, that's fine. So you might say if you do cardio first thing in the morning and then you come back in the evening and do your weight training, that's fine. So I would say if you find that you're spending a lot more time in the gym than you want, and it might be easier to split things up and do your cardio and the strength training, or your conditioning and your strength, or if you do kickboxing, you do your kickboxing, and whatever it is you're doing. If you're doing different workouts at different times a day, I would say that would be fine. Especially if that's easier for you than spending a lot of time at the gym. I would just start off by doing it like once or twice a week, and then build it beyond that. So I wouldn't change the program to doing 2 a days 5 days a week. I would do maybe 1 or 2 days a week where you do 2 a day and see how your body responds to that, and then add to it. If you're splitting it into 2 a day, but you're doing the same thing, then I would probably stick with the one time. So like, let's say you run in the morning, or let's say you're running and you're doing cardio and you spend 3 hours doing cardio. I probably wouldn't do 3 hours of cardio unless there's a reason, but B, I wouldn't do cardio in the morning and then more cardio at night. I'd probably try to keep that all in the same workout. Or let's say you're a swimmer and you, like some people I know that'll do swimming and then they'll go and do their workout. So if like you spend an hour swimming and then you spend an hour on the treadmill, I'd probably just spend all that time in one piece rather than splitting it up. But if you do swimming and then you do weight training, then I might split it. So it kind of, depending what you're doing, like I wouldn't do weights in the morning and at night unless you're a bodybuilder and that's just part of your program. So I think it'd be good to do 2 a days if you're doing 2 different things. Otherwise, you can keep it in the same workout. But regardless, you shouldn't have to spend more than 2 hours in the gym anyway. That's excessive unless there's a reason for doing it.
Yeah, I think, James, maybe really look at your program and look at how efficient you're being. Is there any way that you can maybe get some more out of your workouts? Maybe are you not pushing yourself hard enough?
Well, no, it seems like from what he says, he's getting results. So I think it's not his concern isn't about results. It's more about he's spending too much time in the gym. So I'm actually
but why is that? James, are you socializing in the gym? How much time to rest are you on your cell phone? Like that's what I'm looking at. Saying, Are we doing other things besides working out? If you're not, and you're just Superman and you can just work out, well, that's amazing.
I've seen people do that. I definitely see people who can spend 2-3 hours easy just working straight. It's it's impressive, but you can see it. But I would definitely say there's always a way to be efficient. Yeah. So, but also it's like if you're getting results, I don't want to touch that too much. So
if you're doing
if you're getting results, keep doing what you're doing. If you feel like you want, if you can split it up, you know, totally fine to split it up as long as you're doing different things and you kind of ease yourself into it.
I think a lot of it also depends on your lifestyle. How close are you to the gym? Is going 2 times a day, does that fit in with your lifestyle?
Yeah.
If you're able to do it, if it's comfortable, and if you enjoy it, that's another thing. If you just enjoy it and it's something that you're able to do and you're not putting your body in harm, go for it.
Right.
But yeah, just really examine your overall workout and see what can you do. Is there a way to really do it all in one? Are you doing different things? Just take a look at it and really think about it. And always feel free to write us in.
Yeah.
Let us know what your results are. Let us know what you've decided to do. Maybe in a few weeks or a couple months. Let us know, and we're always happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, if you have any follow-up, definitely send us. And anybody, if you have any questions, send us. We've been good about making this a weekly thing, so trying to do an asset trainer every week. So if you have questions, keep sending them in. And
we have an exercise of the
yes,
week.
we have an exercise of the week. So whenever you have an idea for an exercise of the week, it's something that's hard to describe, which is annoying. But I have been posting. So it's posted on the app. So if you download the GymWits app, which is on iOS, you will find a PDF with this. I will try to get these on Instagram eventually, but we will be posting it with the exercise at least with the app, so app users have a little bonus. So hopefully if you do have iOS, you get it. That way you have the GymWits, and we have the little thing that'll make you feel guilty for not listening to our episode. That's not my joke, by the way. So I totally stole the joke. I forgot from where, but it does pop up, and the little red thing will say 1 or 2 or 3 depending on how many episodes you haven't listened to.
Yeah.
To make you feel guilty. So definitely download the app if you have an iPhone or an iPad or any iDevice. And all right, so yeah, you explain it, and then I'll probably have to come in and explain it again.
So it's called the pike, and it's a wonderful exercise. I did. Basically, you are in a push-up position, either on dumbbells that are sturdy, or so like a perfect push-up, or one of those devices.
What about just hands on the floor?
Or just hands on the floor.
Hands on the floor.
And you have your legs up on a physio ball. And the idea is you're extended out in push-up position, and then what you're going to do is you're going to bring your legs in, so almost you're creating a V. Your butt goes up in the air, and you're creating a V with your hips, and that's what happens. And you extend in, you sort of use your core to pull your legs in, and you're creating a V. So you're going to try to bring the ball in as close to your hands as possible. And then you're going to release and go back to the full push-up position, and you're going to repeat. So you're going to try to create this almost V and bring your hands as close to the ball as possible. Everyone's going to be a little bit different based on your level of flexibility and core strength and that stuff, but I found this exercise to be really wonderful. It was difficult at first, but once you get into it, I think it's a really great exercise.
All right, so yeah, so I'll just you described it pretty well. So you're basically in as Justin said, a push-up position. So you're prone. So your stomach's facing the floor, feet on the ball. Everything stays straight. So basically your back stays straight, legs stay straight when you're doing the movement. So you shoot your butt up into the air. You make like an inverted V. So you want to make sure when you're doing it, and again, we'll have the picture with this for any app users and hopefully for Instagram eventually. Your legs and back stay straight. So when you shoot your butt up in the air, you don't round your back, you don't bend the knees. So that's an important part. So the kind of points of movement are at the shoulders and at the hips. So that main thing. And then there are progressions. You could do it holding dumbbells for more instability, but it's hard enough to get to the position where you're just holding with the feet on the ball. So we start there, and then we can work our way towards gripping a perfect push-up or dumbbells.
I actually find it easier with that, but
yeah,
I guess everyone's a little.
So that's it. So yeah, basically it's just a pike with the physio ball.
How do you do a pike without a physio ball? Is there a way? Or you need that movement, the roller type thing?
You could use like a gliding disc, or you could just walk your hands up into a pike.
There you go.
Do that too. So there are ways to do it without a physio ball. All right, I guess that's it. Anything else?
Awesome. Nope, that's it.
All right, all of our stuff, hopefully know. If you're a new listener, then you don't, but it's at thegymwits.com. All of our social media, and again, download the app if you haven't. It's on iOS. Subscribe if you haven't. Review, please. It always helps us. And that's it. So I'm Ryan George.
I'm Justin Guild, aka Chef Sonic.
And we are the GymWits.